Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webcast. My name is Lila Marigza. Today we're speaking with the Reverend Larry Hollon. Now, Larry's a lifelong storyteller with experience in radio, TV, print, and video. He's the General Secretary of United Methodist Communications and also serves as publisher of the United Methodist News Service. Now, before we get started this morning, I want to remind everyone that you can submit questions for Larry Hollon anytime during this webinar by following the instructions on your screen. So Larry, as I mentioned, you're the General Secretary of United Methodist Communications. Now, I'm sure a lot of folks out there would like to know, were you a pastor before you became a professional communicator or vice versa?
No, I was a pastor before I became a communicator. Although the two are so intertwined that it's hard to really make a distinction. My first appointment out of seminary at St. Paul in Kansas City was to Aldersgate United Methodist Church in southern Douglas County and northern Sarpy County in Omaha. And I stayed there for 13 years. And during that period of time also became involved in producing a radio talk show and television news for the ecumenical community, and then moved into special appointment from that local church to media on a full-time basis on behalf of the church.
Okay, well Larry, we're talking today because you have written a book soon to be published called We Must Speak. Can you give us an overview of what that book is about?
The book is really a call to the leadership of the mainline communions and to colleague communicators for us to rethink communications. We've been in a state of reduction with regard to the budgets and the funding and the role of communication for the past 30 years in the mainline denominations. Not as deeply a cut in the United Methodist Church as in some other denominations. But my concern is that there is a loss of voice as a result of that, and that communication needs to be elevated to a strategic level so that we can be advisors to those who are making decisions and launching initiatives to help them create an effective communication strategy and to revitalize the church through communications. And so I've been concerned about this for some time, and it seemed appropriate to write about it now because we are in a state of reorganization in the United Methodist Church, and that has implications for all of us as communicators and for all of us as leaders. I think the second concern I have with this, Lila, is that there are a number of people who live their lives through media. They are comfortable in the landscape of media today, and by the mainline denominations being absent, it is as if we don't care, we don't have a concern, we don't have answers to some of the searching questions that they have. And so we need to be present in media with positive messages, with an image of God that is greater than a God of judgment, which is more often than not what's presented in media today, and a more holistic understanding of faith.
Very good. Well, Larry, Mike McCurry wrote the foreword for your book. McCurry, of course, the press secretary for President Bill Clinton. He's a guy who knows a lot about effective communications. And here's some of what he had to say in the foreword. Brand is a big thing. Google is a verb. You Google something to figure it out. You Xerox something that you need to copy. You FedEx something that needs to get there overnight. Who we are and what we are is a sum of how we communicate. And everything we do and say, and everything that sometimes goes unspoken, communicates to those who are waiting to hear, what is the United Methodist Church? Why is it so important for us as a church to clearly define our brand?
I think it's important for us as a church, if one looks back to the 9/11 period of time, the United Methodist Church sent a message globally that the circumstances of 9/11 were not an act of God. They were not the punishment of God for an unfaithful people. They were, in fact, acts of evil that occurred, and that God is our source of strength to help us through such circumstances as this. If one looks at the disasters that were caused by the hurricanes on the Gulf Coast a few years ago, if one looks as recently as the tornadoes that were so damaging in the Midwest, and the evangelical right clergy who said these were God churning up these houses. It's so important for us as a mainline denomination who understands a God of love, a God of justice, a God of peace, a God who is embracing us and wants us to flourish as people, and who created the entire universe for us to flourish. To get that understanding of God before people. And as long as we are not doing that, we're abrogating our responsibility, I think, as Christians. And I think communication is therefore a form of ministry. It's a way of doing theology. And we must speak these things because that is who we are. And that is the challenge that we face as Christians in the 21st century in a hyper-connected media landscape that we live in today.
And again, that is the title of the book, We Must Speak. We're going to look at another quote from the book. You've spent the last 12 years at the helm of United Methodist Communications crafting our message as a church. A lot has changed in the last decade in the way we stay connected. Now, in the book you say, the story of Jesus, God's love told through story, parable, act, and symbol, was told originally in the language of the street in a manner that it could be understood by the overlooked, the excluded, the demeaned, and the afflicted. The language of the street in our day is the language of the iPad, the laptop, the language of electronic culture. How are we as a church embracing all of these new tools of technology?
We're embracing them in several ways. One of the ways is by addressing people through digital media, through advertising, being present where they are on the internet or in the use of mobile devices. We are providing apps for them that give them information as they seek to discover what the United Methodist Church is concerned about and how it is acting in the world and behaving missionally. We're also adapting to the commercial environment by providing messages that speak of God and of the role of the church in ways that are very, very common and very relevant. One of the things that we learned when we did research for the older version of our advertising, known as Igniting Ministry, is that the attributes of the United Methodist Church of being a global community, of being a church that is not dogmatic, but that is engaged in active expression of the faith through mission, and that is a church that is inclusive, that we want to reach out to all people. Open hearts, open minds, open doors are attributes that people who are searching for community want to see in a church. Well, we didn't have to create those. That is who we are. And so that's the message, that's the way we are approaching being in the media environment and using all of the tools that are available for us. My belief about these tools is that while they may be considered neutral by some, if they are neutral, it's our responsibility to sanctify them, to make them tools that help people find God in ways that are meaningful to them. And so being present in the media environment and using these tools is not a neutral act, and it's not simply taking advantage of tools. It's doing the work of faith, and we need to be engaged in that very actively.
Very good. Well, let me take a moment to check my iPad, see if anyone is writing in with questions. So far, not yet, but here's my technology right here. Well, Larry, messaging is important not just on the large scale, say with the message that UMCOM provides on behalf of the church. Conference communicators also play a vital role in engaging people in the pews and informing them of opportunities at local church level. Now, you say in the book, what I'm calling for is a more expansive understanding of our mission as communicators on behalf of the church and as communicators of the gospel of Jesus Christ in an electronic culture and wired world. Many of our conference communicators are using tools like YouTube and Twitter to get the message out, but this level of technology obviously doesn't work for everyone. Can you talk about how we found effective communication strategies for areas like the Philippines and Africa?
Yeah. What is still possible in many places around the world is low-cost, low-power FM radio. And it's a very useful tool. I've been in places in different parts of the world where women's groups, for example, set up a simple teacup satellite receiver, plug it into a boombox, and record on audio tape the data that is streaming from a satellite called Native Voices, which allows them to know what the market price is for their grain in Nairobi, so that they are not dependent upon a middle person and the costs that that person can inflate and then pay them a low price but receive a higher price in the market. That's one way. Another way is how people are using these tools to text message, so that a community health worker can use a cell phone to text that there will be an immunization clinic at a particular location on a particular day, and distribute that through SMS text messaging to a broad range of receivers. We've looked at Freedom Phone, which is a database service that allows people to essentially access information, but to do it through a cell phone by dialing in a number and then punching up in response to a menu the kind of information that they are looking for. The advantage of that is that you don't have to be necessarily literate to do it. If you can use a cell phone, you can respond to the numbers and get the information. You don't have to have an internet connection. You can do it through the system that your cell phone is on. And it is a database that is as useful as the internet. We have also looked at how text messaging can be utilized in relationship to community radio, so that a disc jockey or a program host on a radio station can ask people to text in information, and can do that in a way that allows the broadcast capabilities of radio to marry with the one-to-one capabilities of texting. So all of those are ways that we've looked at using new media in places that are not yet where we are in terms of broadband capacity.
Now, you mentioned interaction with a host on the air, and it's a good time for us to pause for a moment. And I'd like to remind everyone out there, if you have questions and would you like to participate in this webinar, we're taking questions, and you do have a few more minutes to get those questions in. And we're going to look, Larry, at one more excerpt from your book. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a question coming in. Here's my iPad. The question is from Mark Doyle in West Michigan, and Mark says, what advice do you have for communicators to stress the importance? Well, let's see. I'm sorry, there's more to this. Mark Doyle from West Michigan says, what legislation at General Conference might impact UMCOM's ability to function as an independent strategic agency? How can we as communicators help educate members of General Conference on the importance of the work we do here at UMCOM? Thank you, Mark, for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That is a very relevant question. The IoT proposal, as it is currently written, places UMCOM in a shared service function. It appears to us about 3 levels down in the hierarchy of the direction of this shared service function. It locates UMCOM in the same function with the General Counsel on Finance and Administration. The General Commission on Communication, in reviewing this, said that they think that is not the location that UMCOM should be placed in. And they called for the IoT and for General Conference to reconsider how strategic communications functions, such as UMCOM, should be at an equivalent level with the GCFA, and therefore elevated from being a support service, as it is currently being proposed, to a strategic level, and making it equal in an organizational chart at the same place that the General Counsel on Finance and Administration would be. We will submit legislation through an amendment process to encourage the General Conference to consider that. the Plan B legislation that has been designed by some laypersons and clergy around the world actually places the communications function in a direct relationship to the governing council that they are proposing, which is a more strategic placement than the IoT placement. And so I would take, I think it would be useful for our communicators to look at that legislation and to provide information to delegates and to others that would help them to decide where they think communication should be. My personal belief is that because we as communicators are very frequently the first cut, our budgets are the first to be reduced, that we need to be advocating for the value that we bring to the church, not out of self-interest, but out of the good interests of the whole church. If the church does not understand the importance of the communication function that we bring to it, we need to, with some confidence, help the church consider that function and to be speaking for it, even as we build advocacy with others to help us in that task. So I think Mark's question is very pertinent and very relevant right now.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that question. Let me make sure we have another general question, and that is the book available online?
The book will be available online.
Okay, good.
Actually, what I would like to encourage people to do is, and we're talking about exactly how to do this, is to make it a more interactive book than one that you simply get and it's the final copy. That maybe over time we will have folks who will want to contribute to the book, who will want to use some of their own personal stories that will illustrate strategic value of communication so that it becomes not a book just by me, but it becomes a book that is created in a broader community among communicators who know what they're doing and then can be owned more widely than as the author by one. So we're looking at how we'll do that. It will be available online. It will also be in print. It's still in final copy editing, and we are still thinking about the tactic of how we create this interactive environment for it.
And some folks are just learning about the book for the first time today.
Well,
so
yeah, we wanted to do this webinar with our communications colleagues so that this is literally the first public awareness that I'm even working on this project. And it was important to do it with communicators first.
And you may hear from some of them if they have feedback for the book, of course. And we're going to mention how you can get a preview copy at the end of this. I do have one more excerpt from the book that I'd like to chat with you about, Larry. And we live in a new reality. We can't continue to do business as usual and expect to survive. That, again, is an excerpt from your book. When we talk about this new reality, we're talking about this explosion of new media and communications tools, yet budgets are shrinking. The communicators who are tuning in today know all about this. Can you explain the importance of the role, how can they explain the importance of the role of communications in a system that often views communications as a service rather than a key function of their organization? How can they go back and explain this?
I think we can explain the role that we play as twofold. One is that we help to think carefully about how the church presents itself to the world and how it communicates internally through conversations among ourselves. And the second is that we can do this in a way that is more economic today than in the past, because in the past with broadcast media, the costs for capital and for expenses and for time were considerably more than they are for investing in digital media. That does not mean that digital media is less time-consuming, less complicated, and in some cases all that less expensive, but it is less expensive to do digital media on the whole than it is to do broadcast media. And so what we do is add value to the ability of the church to tell its story. And the fact is that if we do not lead in telling our story, someone else will. And that may not be a story that we agree with, and it may not be true nor authentic to who we are. Our leadership, neither me nor any bishop nor any communicator, can control the conversation today. The conversation will take place regardless of whether we participate in it or not. What I'm suggesting to our leadership is we need to be actively participating, not because we can control the conversation, but because the conversation will happen whether we try to control it or not. And I want us to be engaged with the highest quality, most accurate information, most theologically sound presentation that we can make. And that's what a communicator does. And that's why a communicator is important to an annual conference or to a general agency.
Very good. Well, we're going to ask one more time if there are questions out there from communicators. Oh, we have a question coming in right now from Ernani from the Philippines. Give us a moment. I can hear typing frantically as the question is transferred to us here. And the question is, what advice do you have for communicators? I'm sorry. No, I have an incomplete message. I actually don't have that, so if someone could send me the message, that would be great. I'm not seeing Ernani's question from the Philippines. You know, Larry, we have folks joining us today from the Philippines, from Sierra Leone, from Zimbabwe. It's very exciting, and our U.S. communicators as well.
Yes.
Okay. The question from Ernani is, what advice do you have for communicators to stress the importance of this ministry? And I feel like you've kind of just answered that, but if you wanted to speak on that a little bit more for Ernani in the Philippines.
Well, I think it's helpful for us to help our leaders who are not digital natives understand that the world has really changed. And unfortunately, in some cases, because they are not as actively involved in social media as maybe their children are, what we need to help them understand is if we are going to reach their children and their grandchildren, then we have to start functioning in those media that those children use. And those media are cell phones, they are iPads, they are online media. And the reality is there is not one leader in this church who does not want their children to be reached by the church. But the way we reach them will not be by issuing pronouncements. It will be by working with them in conversations on digital media. And so helping them to understand that a way to reach digital natives is through these media is also, I think, a way to help them understand the importance of the role of a communicator today. We change the paradigm because the world has changed the paradigm for us.
You have to reach people on their level. That's
right.
Absolutely right. So I'm seeing that I think that concludes the questions from the communicators. So thank you, Larry. This concludes our interview. The book is called We Must Speak, and it is due out later this year. We invite you to preview the book today by following the link on your screen, or you can visit www.umcom.org/WeMustSpeak, or on Twitter, use the hashtag WeMustSpeak. Again, thanks for joining us.